Today we're going to be talking about 5 things that I think are essential to every successful shrimp tank. So I've made tons of videos about shrimp, especially recently. I've really gotten into them, especially the neocaradinas. So today's video is going to be all about like cherry shrimp, all the neocaridina species. There's a few things I think that if you're a beginner, might be worth knowing, things that you might want to pick up before you get some shrimp. They're not expensive, but they're going to help you out a lot with having success with breeding them especially. So the first thing we're going to talk about is botanicals. So botanicals are considered driftwood a botanical, but all of the natural things that you add to a fish tank. So for instance, driftwood's a great botanical. I add driftwood to pretty much all of my shrimp tanks, but some other really interesting botanicals can be leaves. So we sell leaves on our website and we sell leaves in our store here in Brisbane, Australia, which you guys can come and visit. My favorite botanicals to use are banana leaves, Indian almond leaves, mulberry leaves. Don't just add any old leaf to your tank, do a bit of research before you add them, but those 3 leaves work really good for shrimp because you'll add them to the tank, they'll add a little bit of tannin to the water or whatever, which kind of helps the shrimp out a little bit. But once they sink and they soak down, if you add like 1 Indian almond leaf, they start to decay. And while the leaf's decaying, it creates biofilm, which is like the #1 food source for all your shrimp, and it's really good for feeding babies. Now, the driftwood's kind of always breaking down and forming biofilm on it, which is why I add it to all the tanks. When we're breeding shrimp or we're keeping shrimp, we're actually trying to grow the biofilm. We're not trying to grow the shrimp. I learned this from my friend Glenn, and I've got a fish room tour of his, which you guys can go and watch. We're trying to grow biofilm. Botanicals are a great way to do this. So all those leaves I just talked about are excellent, and I'm not a scientist, but I think it's just a reaction between the decaying and the biofilm just forms on it and decays down that, or feeds off the decaying wood and leaves. And you'll add an Indian almond leaf to a tank like this with a couple hundred shrimp in there, and a week later it's completely gone and you can add another one. And it just gives them something to eat all day, and it'll help with keeping as many babies as you can. It'll also help with the success of how many babies you get through to adulthood with your shrimp. So botanicals are great. The next thing I think that's essential for shrimp tanks is crushed coral. Now, some of the tanks here in the room don't have crushed coral in them, and that's because my town water just seems to be really excellent for shrimp. So we don't need to add crushed coral to our tanks here. But some people I found, like in my old room, I used to have to add crushed coral to the tanks because there was just something missing in there. So I like to use aragonite. I think that's how you pronounce it. And you can just buy it in big 10-kilogram bags, and I put it into little fruit bags and I just chuck it in the tank, or you can just throw pieces in and around the tank. I don't know how it works, but for some reason it seems to help the shrimp out a lot with their exoskeletons. So if you're new to shrimp, you've never kept them before, I'd definitely recommend picking up some crushed coral and adding it to your shrimp tank. I add it to the shrimp tanks in here anyways, it never hurts. So I'd go ahead and add just a couple of pieces to each tank. I don't know whether they eat off of it or whatever, but I found the relationship between shrimp and the crushed coral excellent. Like if I have any issues with shrimp just randomly dying or other things going on in the tank, I always just add crushed coral just to help with that tank. And part of the reason, I'm going to go a little bit more in depth here, but when you add botanicals to the tank, the botanicals create humic acids which create pH. They create acid in the tank, and it's going to drop your pH down. Adding crushed coral gives the pH something to eat away at because it's got that calcium carbonate. So while that acid's eating away at the calcium, it's actually buffering the tank and taking the acid out of the tank. So it helps to keep a more stable tank at the same time. Just a little bit of crushed coral, not too much. If you've got soft water, definitely recommend adding it. It goes a long way. The next thing I'm going to recommend to add to your shrimp tank is just a little bit more fun and something I think is great for pretty much every single tank, and this is houseplants. I've got a video which you guys can go and watch on which houseplants are the best for your tank, but houseplants are excellent for all of your tanks because depending on which houseplant you use, you've got to go through the list and figure it out. But I add like pothos to a lot of my tanks, and the reason for this is the pothos sends down big roots and the shrimp stick in the roots and eat off of it, and the babies can go and hide in it. It creates a surface for biofilm, but it also helps just to keep a nice, natural, steady tank. And this is because the houseplants are constantly sucking out the bad chemicals produced by waste in that tank, so mainly nitrates, and it just helps to keep a more balanced ecosystem. The houseplants look so cool as well growing out of the top of the tank, and I find that the shrimp just really like to get in amongst the roots. It must just be like resembling nature for them, so houseplants are another great thing to add. And going on further, the next thing I'm going to recommend for you guys to add to your shrimp tanks is plants. So my favorite plants for shrimp is probably moss. But recently, one of my other favorites has been this floating plant here, which I've got tons of in this tank, which is foxtail. I've been growing this stuff like crazy here in the room, and the reason is it grows rapidly, It has a ton of surface area, so more space for the biofilm to form, more space for babies to get into. The shrimp just seem to love it, and it also helps with filtering out the tank. So moss is really good too, like Java moss is great because it has a lot of surface area as well, so biofilm's gonna form on that too. But moss grows a little bit slower. You could just add some moss in here as well and it'd be fine, but this foxtail stuff just seems to be excellent. And I wish I found out about it earlier. It's really good for breeding fish and shrimp. So adding plants is always an excellent thing to do. Again, it's going back to that natural style of tank, which I think is what everyone should be going for. Making things as natural as possible makes it so easy on yourself because you're just letting Mother Nature do its thing inside of your tank and you're not touching anything. And yeah, so adding plants is definitely something worth doing, especially Java moss or this foxtail stuff just seems to be excellent. And finally, this might seem pretty obvious, but I'm gonna say lighting. Having any kind of light on your shrimp tank is essential. I've just found that for breeding them, every now and then we'll have a light go bust here in the fish room, and if I'm lazy to replace it, the breeding of the shrimp just goes down drastically, like they don't breed as well. There might be some kind of relationship the shrimp have with light, but the tanks where I have more light, the shrimp breed better. It's weird. I don't know if this is like scientifically proven or what, but I think most people have a light on their fish tank, but some people, because of these recent videos of like ecosystems and no filter setups and all that sort of stuff, people are trying to do shrimp as easy and cheap as possible. I think a light is essential for shrimp. So, you know, even just a cheap little floodlight you can get from your hardware store or just like any old 10-watt light just goes a long way with shrimp. I recommend keeping it on for 8 to 10 hours. And I think the other thing that light might help with is growing biofilm. So this might seem super obvious, but having a light, I think it's really essential for shrimp breeding and keeping. And I guess like a little bonus tip here too, another thing I'd recommend to any beginner for when they get shrimp is sponge filters. A lot of people when they buy a setup, they're gonna have like an hang-on back filter or an internal filter. I would instantly just chuck those out. I'm not a big fan of them. And yeah, a sponge filter kind of looks big and bulky and ugly, but they're so good for shrimp. Like they are so fucking good for shrimp. And the reason is the sponge filter just runs off a single air pump. So it's really cheap, super easy, like low tech. And it's constantly sucking in water through it, through the middle, like the air goes up and sucks up water through it. It creates a ton of surface area for biofilm, so the babies are constantly stuck to it and eating off of it, and it's creating biofilm, but it's also baby safe. So the sponge filter is never gonna hurt any baby shrimp, and I reckon it's just a little essential thing that I'd add, so just a little bonus thing in this video. But again, just a little quick one here for you guys. Thank you so much for watching it. I really appreciate it. Good luck with your shrimp, and yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video.